So I wanted to talk today about a topic which comes up every so often by those who call themselves environmentalists, and that is the issue of cats. So I was at a meeting the other night in town, and on the board, which was totally unrelated to the meeting I was attending, was this somebody had drawn on a whiteboard an image of a cat. And had various little sort of captions to it. One was that the cat had a tummy full of wildlife, and happy cats are cats that are indoor cats. What else did they have? And that, you know, basically they were destroying the environment. Now, this would probably be from, I think it was actually an environmentalist group who somebody had put that on the whiteboard. Well, firstly, I often find that a lot of environmentalists who belong to these groups, firstly, they're not vegan, which, as far as I'm concerned, completely cancels them out to be taken seriously. If you know anything about animal agriculture and climate change, if you've watched Cowspiracy, then you know it's a huge deal to be vegan is to address a huge amount of devastation. But, you know, of course, as I always mention in my other videos, the most important reason to be vegan is because non-human animals are not our resources, they're sentient. So, but anyway, you often find that a lot of environmentalists, there can be rabid anti-cat people, and, you know, will sort of make all sorts of jokes at cats' expense, but they're not vegan. I don't think that, and you would rarely find a vegan who is anti-cat, because they understand that, firstly, an ethical vegan I'm talking about, firstly, and that's what veganism is, an ethical position. So firstly, the reason you won't find vegans who are vegan for what I consider the right reasons going on and on about cats is because they know that cats are just victims of the property status that we have placed on animals. So, you know, it's not their fault that they're being bred into existence to be sold, or to be, you know, sold either from shelters, and I use that word loosely sometimes because shelters are often just slaughterhouses for cats and dogs. But you know, firstly, they're part of the property status of animals. Whether it doesn't matter that we fetishize cats and dogs, they are still considered property, and they're used, you know, for various reasons. There's a lot of people that love cats, and they love dogs, and they love living with them, and they consider them family members, and that's great. And I often wish that they would extend that that sort of moral concern that they have for cats and dogs, widen that to other animals, because other animals are sentient too. And if you got to know them like we get to know family members that we can, you know, cats and dogs that we consider family members, we'd realize that they are so much like the cats and dogs whom we love as much as any other family member. But anyway, but cats and dogs and other animals that we consider companions, in quotes, are victims of our speciesism, the property, you know, and are considered property. And I'll be very frank here as a vegan, as much as, like, we live with rescue cats here, and I love them dearly. We love them dearly as much as we would any human family member. But I also recognize that they're dying by the millions, being killed by the millions in shelters, and through no fault of their own, and they're being bred into existence to be sold. And there's a huge industry behind them, that being the you know, pet food industry. So, you know, there's a lot of people have a lot to gain from keeping the continuation of the sort of companion animal thing going. And personally, I mean, people sort of think that this position might be extreme, but it's not. If I had the only 2 cats left in the world, and that would be unlikely because there are literally millions in what we call here the bush, in the forests, because people dump them. There's literally millions of quote-unquote feral cats. I hate that word feral, but yes, there's millions of them, so they're never going to go extinct. But anyway, if I had the only 2 that weren't in, the only 2 left on the planet, I wouldn't be breeding them, because they should not be bred into existence, to be sort of sold and whatever. They end up living in. You can look after cats as well as you can, but many of them will be kept indoors, which is really a prison. I don't care what people say, that they have all these different toys and cat trees and everything. That's all very nice, and there may be a certain percentage of cats who are just totally fine with that and are happy in that sort of environment. But there's probably heaps of people, there's heaps of people who have cats indoors, and there are a certain percentage of cats who are, might be happy spending their whole entire life indoors. But there are a lot of cats who are not. And basically we deprive them of their freedom from the time they're born until they die, and I don't think that's right. And people go, oh, what about wildlife and all, quote unquote wildlife? Well, this is the thing. It's like, if we didn't have this sort of fetishization of cats, and dogs, by the way, kill lots of quote unquote wildlife too, and you never see people beating up on dogs. And I often think that there's a certain amount of misogyny attached to this hatred of cats. In fact, back in the times where there was, they were burning witches and so forth, the Inquisition and whatever, where, tens of thousands of women were, if their property was taken from them, that was the main point of this whole accusing women of being witches. But if they had a cat, that was considered their familiar, and so they would be killed for that. And I often think that oftentimes when I hear people saying how much they hate cats, but they never, there's often misogyny attached to it, because, with dogs, there's a lot of people like dogs, and I love dogs too, but there's a lot of people who like dogs because they can control them, because they can be a pack leader. It's a sort of a patriarchal thing. And a lot of people hate cats because they cannot be controlled. And, it's just this fun thing that people seem to enjoy, hating cats. And I often see that as a sort of a misogyny attached to that. But anyway, that's something to consider. Excuse me. So anyway, back to this thing about being an indoor cat. That's often promoted by these, shelters that, sell cats, adopt them out. Now, even though that might be a good suggestion, but I often feel like, I'm going to be a bit conspiratorial here, not conspiratorial, but I often feel like a lot of shelters who ask for donations, who often are not a vegan organization, which is very sad. They know that there's a certain amount of the public don't like that cats can kill wildlife, in quotes. And so to appease the public, they always suggest to people who are adopting to keep them indoors, because that then enables them to continue on sort of finding, homes for them and getting money for it. So, they have careers too. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on the people who work in these shelters, because there are a lot of good people, but they are also oftentimes businesses that pay wages and whatever. And to keep their business going, you don't hear them saying we should end the breeding of cats, particularly. They'll often have stakeholders that are breeders. There was one in Queensland had that. They have stakeholders that are cat breeders, and the reason these people are stakeholders is because they have an interest in being able to continue to breed cats. And when you have these sort of when you have a shelter associated with a stakeholder that is into breeding cats, or a stakeholder that is a pet food industry stakeholder, these are all in what I see conflicts of interest, because it has a sort of a stake in the domestication of cats continuing on. Now, as I've said to you, as a vegan, I mean, I think it's very important that people adopt and, you know, rescue animals. It's very, very important. But as I said to you, so millions are dying, are being killed in shelters every year. And millions are being, all over the world, are suffering too, either confined in houses which are too hot or too cold, or they're abusive, people who they're living with are abusive. There are people who torture animals and psychologically abuse them or whatever. And we're basically, you know, as much as I love living with cats, and I really do, I love them, I think they're wonderful individuals, but as I said, if I only had the last 2 cats in the world and they were both, you know, sort of able to, you know, breed, I would not be breeding any more into existence. And as I said, people always go, oh, that's dreadful, you want to see cats go extinct? Well, that's impossible. Cats will not go extinct, because there's millions and millions, as I say, even just in Australia, in the bush, in the forests. They won't go extinct, and they weren't domesticated in the beginning. They were cats that used to visit, you know, various colonies of people, and they were, you know, killing mice, and then people started sort of seeing them as beneficial to, you know, keeping mice away from their food, and so they'd probably give them a little bit of food now and then, and eventually they domesticated them. But they were wild before that. So anyway, so that's my position. That's an abolitionist vegan position, that the property status of animals must end because it's immoral, and that includes, you know, our fetishization of and breeding into existence of cats as quote unquote companions. You know, they have their own reasons to exist that are not reliant on us, but we've made them reliant on us, and they live in this sort of never world where they're basically completely reliant on us, which is kind of awful. I mean, as even, you know, our cats here have a wonderful existence. You know, when I say wonderful, I mean we love them very much. We give them as much care and love and security as possible. We supervise outings and stuff, and you know, but they still live in a sort of a you know, where they're almost like they're desexed. You know, these animals are desexed really early. They sort of infantilized to a degree, you know, because they're completely sheltered and they're completely reliant on us. So, you know, it's as much as, you know, one might love domesticated, you know, like a cat or a dog. You know, have you ever seen videos of dogs when the quote-unquote owner goes out, you know, for the day? A lot of dogs fret. They get incredibly anxious. You know, they're used to being in packs. And, you know, when the pack leader or whatever goes away, a lot of dogs get incredibly anxious and lonely. And a lot of dogs, you know, they have all sorts of dreadful lives, you know, a lot of dogs, because people don't really know how to cater for their needs. They don't take them for walks. They leave them chained up. They don't recognize that they're too hot or too cold. They leave them in cars. They drop them off in shelters if they behave in a way that they don't like. I mean, can you imagine if we did that to humans? Just like if somebody had the wrong, in quotes, temperament, in quotes, that we just drop them off somewhere to be killed. I mean, this is how we treat sentient animals. There's a lot of people in Tasmania love dogs, but there are many, many thousands of dogs who don't have homes and who are just dropped off in shelters because the people have gotten sick of them, or they're going on holidays. I mean, this is how we treat these supposed animals that we, you know, most of the time fetishize, and where we spend billions of dollars every year. You know, people on the planet spend billions of dollars. It's a very, very well-off industry, the pet food industry, the breeders, and et cetera, et cetera. So you know, there's all sorts of things, but I've gotten off the track of this whole environmentalist thing in cats. I just think it's a lot of cats do not, and why should they, do not like being confined for their entire life, no matter how nice we might be to them, no matter how many toys. There are a lot of cats who are psychologically stressed out, particularly living with other cats. They're not meant to be living in groups with one another. So we put them through all these sort of weird things that are just unnatural, all so that we can have these quote-unquote companions. You know, it's incredibly, it's incredibly selfish, really, you know, in the end. And so and often these environmentalists, they are not vegan, and they complain about cats and love to hate them, and they love people hating them, and shelters feed into all of that by appeasing the environmentalists, when really the people who run the shelters are often not vegan, and have stakeholders that are into breeding cats and dogs and whatever. The vet industry, I mean, they rake it in with the amount of money they charge for cats and dogs. I mean, it's outrageous. We had a $600 bill just for one cat just recently, and it's disgusting because, I mean, you know, if we went, and we can't really afford it, but we do, and we have to actually pay it off. Why should, if we, you know, we've already domesticated them, and now you have to have enough money to be able to look after them, and most people don't have that kind of money. Most people don't have that kind of money. I don't even have that kind of money, $600 to be putting out. And yet, you know, of course, when you love them dearly, like family members, you just pay that money. You don't think about it, but it's disgusting, I find, the vet hospitals here in Australia charge, like the Light Brigade. I mean, they really charge a huge amount of money. They'll charge, like, just to walk in the door, I think it's $80 or something, 80 Australian dollars, something like that. Then, you know, if they do a blood pressure on them, then it's $25, or that's gone up to $30, just to put a little Doppler machine on a cat's pulse. I mean, we used to use those ages and ages ago in nursing in the 80s, little Doppler machines on for certain things, and it's just a little, you know, it's nothing. And here they are charging almost $30 to take a blood pressure. And then there's blood tests, you know, that cost sort of $250 to $300, and you know, a urine test, you know, is $100, you know, to get a screen of something is $180 or something, you know, ridiculous costs that people just can't afford. And eventually, most people I know could not afford to take a cat or a dog to the vet. And what does that mean? That means those animals suffer greatly and probably die prematurely. So, you know, I'm just sort of disgusted that we're in this situation where humans get health care, and although that's disappearing fast with neoliberalism, and that's why it's important to learn about MMT, if you're in Australia, and I'll put a link to why something about that. But you know, but forget about all these supposed, you know, we fetishize dogs and cats, and yet, you know, most people can't afford to take a dog or a cat that they love, whom they love greatly, to a vet. What does that say about us? And what does that say about the vet industry, that basically they've got enough customers now that can pay these, you know, huge amounts of money. They've obviously got enough of a clientele that can afford that, and then, you know, stuff the rest of us, sort of thing. So I kind of find that really unfortunate, to say the least. Every time I get a bill for something, I just think this is just outrageous. They charge as much as they can because they can. Because I don't think there's really any regulation with it. And they obviously make enough money from the breeders who bring all their, you know, cats in or dogs in, you know, to the vet hospitals. They obviously get enough money from them that the general public is kind of a little bit irrelevant. Anyway, I'm sort of having a bit of a vent now about the vet hospitals and whatever, but I find that's kind of, it really, really upsets me. I think, wow, you know, we can't really afford this. Most people and I'm not paying rent now. You know, we have a house, but most people are paying huge amounts of rent here, particularly in Tasmania where I live, and I think there's no way people could afford this sort of thing. So, you know, but anyway, back to environmentalists. They really need to stop being hypocritical and think about going vegan, and then think about the whole property status of animals thing. If they're vegan, they should be thinking about that. That, you know, we have to cease seeing non-human animals in this way. And when we go vegan, we need to apply that equally and think about the property status of dogs and cats, and that all the millions that are tortured and killed each year, you know, either in shelters they're killed, or they're tortured and killed through people who are, because they get a slap on the wrist or a fine or whatever for killing or torturing animals. You know, there's so much awfulness happens with this companionship, in quotes, animal thing, and the fetishization of these animals. And as I've said, as much as I love sharing my life with cats, if I could see the end of this particular domestication thing of cats and dogs, and of course other animals being vegan, I would, you know, if I could snap my fingers and that would be the end of our attitudes towards animals, and ending our view of them as our resources and as our companions, to be that we can do whatever we want to, even to the point of when we've had enough, we can just take them to a vet or a shelter and have them killed, all that kind of thing. If I could see an end to all of that, absolutely, I would. As an ethical vegan, which is what veganism is, it's an ethical position, I cannot abide by this continuing injustice. Even if I love living with cats, I cannot justify that. You know, what we do every year all over the world to cats, dogs, and other animals that we consider, you know, sort of either companions or whatever, snakes, and I mean, it's ridiculous, the sort of the animals to whom are sold for us to be amused by. I mean, and then selling live mice, or mice that have been killed specifically for snakes, and crickets and all of this. It's disgusting. I go down to a, you know, there's all sorts of businesses that, you know, they breed crickets into existence for lizards, and they breed mice and rats into existence, and then for snakes, and just ridiculous and disgusting. You know, I mean, this is what we do when we're not vegan, and we sort of just see animals as property and resources. This is the sort of awful stuff that happens, you know, and it has to end. And all these people who are wringing their hands about climate change and how it's going to end us and all this kind of stuff, and yet pretend like they don't know anything about animal agriculture, that it's just literally destroying the planet. And I'm going to leave a link. Well, go and watch Cowspiracy, the sustainability secret, and see how crazy animal agriculture is for climate change. It's the other inconvenient truth that the left media don't really mention because it's inconvenient. You know, it's totally inconvenient for people. People in some ways, and this is really truly amazing, my experience is people would rather appease their taste buds, and mind you, plant-based diets are delicious and incredibly rich and varied, right? But people would rather continue on filling their bodies with cholesterol and killing themselves for their taste buds, and they would rather us sort of continue on destroying the planet with animal agriculture than give up animal products. In other words, they would rather us go extinct as a species and take most, and climate change is responsible for the 6 mass extinction. So if you're not vegan, you're contributing directly to the 6 mass extinction, including the environmentalists that are wringing their hands about species going extinct or species being killed by cats, but they're okay with the 6 mass extinction. So, you know, this is the hypocrisy of it all. You know, all for our taste buds. So we'd rather go extinct than do something. So let's think about that, you know. Environmentalists think you're contributing directly to the 6 mass extinction. Who's the problem here? Is it cats? No, it's people. It's human beings. So let's go vegan and end this ridiculousness. And you can find my podcast, howtogovegan.org. Please check it out. Thanks very much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time, bye for now.